The wind, a raw, biting thing, whipped across the vast ochre plains, carrying the scent of dust, wild thyme, and something ancient, something that spoke of endless horizons and the fierce, untamed spirit of the land. It was a wind that had scoured these steppes for millennia, witnessing the rise and fall of countless tribes, the thunder of hooves, the glint of sun on bared steel. Here, under a sky so immense it humbled the soul, ruled Tomeris, queen of the Massagetes. Her throne was not of gold and velvet, but a sturdy saddle, her palace the endless expanse of the earth itself, her crown the fierce loyalty of her people. In her early 30s, Tomeris possessed a stark, compelling beauty, less of delicate features and more of raw, unyielding strength. Her hair, the colour of raven's wing, was often bound in intricate braids, interwoven with small, polished river stones and the occasional feather of a steppe eagle. Her eyes, a startling, clear grey, held the wisdom of the open spaces and a fire that could blaze with terrifying intensity. They missed nothing. Her face, high cheekboned and sun-kissed, bore the faint tracery of old battle scars, a thin white line above her left eyebrow, another tracing her jaw. Not blemishes, but testaments to a life lived on the edge of survival, a life where queens led from the front. She was tall for a woman of her tribe, her frame lean and powerful, honed by years of riding, hunting, and the harsh discipline of steppe warfare. Her hands, though capable of a surprising gentleness with her son, Spargapices, were calloused from the reins of her warhorse and the grip of her composite bow. She moved with the lithe grace of a snow leopard, always alert, always ready. Today, however, a different kind of tension coiled in the air of her main encampment, a sprawling collection of yurts nestled in a shallow, defensible valley carved by the Araxes River. Envoys had arrived from the south, from Cyrus, the Persian king, the self-proclaimed king of kings, whose shadow was stretching ever longer across the known world. Cyrus, who had swallowed Lydia, crushed Babylon, and now cast his covetous gaze upon the lands of the Massagetes. Tomeris sat on a pile of furs within her largest yurt, the air thick with the scent of burning dung and boiled mare's milk. Before her stood the Persian envoys, resplendent in their dyed robes and intricate jewellery, their faces smooth and cunning. Spargapices, her son, a young man on the cusp of his full warrior strength, stood at her right, his hand resting on the hilt of his Akinakis sword, his eyes narrowed with suspicion. He was the image of his late father, tall and broad-shouldered, with Tomeris's fierce eyes. He was her heart, her legacy, the future of their people. Queen Tomeris, the lead envoy, began, his voice smooth as oiled leather. The great king, Cyrus, king of Persia, lord of the four corners of the world, sends you greetings and an offer of alliance. He recognizes your strength, your people's prowess. He proposes to bind our nations through the most sacred of ties, marriage. He offers you his hand to share his throne and his glory. Tomeris listened, her expression unreadable. A marriage proposal, a classic conqueror's gambit. Absorb, assimilate, dominate. She saw through the silken words to the iron fist beneath. To marry Cyrus would be to kneel, to cede her people's hard-won freedom, to become another jewel in his imperial crown. Her gaze flickered to Spargapices, whose young face was tight with suppressed anger. He understood. "Your king is generous," Tomeris said, her voice low and steady, carrying the rumble of distant thunder. "But the Massagetes are not a people to be allied into submission. We value our freedom more than any borrowed glory. Tell Cyrus I am queen of my own lands, and I need no king to share my rule, especially not one whose alliances so often resemble conquests." She paused, her grey eyes fixing the envoy with an unnerving stare. "He seeks not my hand, but my land. Tell him Tomeris of the Massagetes declines his generous offer." The envoy's smile faltered. "The great king will not be pleased, Queen. Pleasure him or not, that is my answer." Tomeris stated, a hint of steel entering her tone. "You have it. Now go." Spargapices escorted the fuming envoys from the encampment. When he returned, his face was grim. "Mother, Cyrus will not take this lightly. His pride is as vast as his empire." Tomeris rose, moving to the yurt's opening, gazing out at the wind-swept plains that were her birthright. "I know, my son. Pride often precedes a fall. He thinks us mere nomads, easily scattered. He does not understand the heart of the Massagetes." She had seen the ambition in Cyrus's eyes before, in lesser chieftains who sought to dominate. She knew the pattern. Diplomacy was merely the velvet glove, war was the iron fist. And Cyrus, having been rebuffed, would soon reveal that fist. Her past was a tapestry woven with conflict and survival. Daughter of a warrior chieftain who had united several Masajte clans, she had learned to ride before she could walk properly, to shoot an arrow with deadly accuracy by the age of 10. Her mother, a wise woman versed in the ancient laws and healing arts, had taught her the secret language of the steppes, the whispers of the wind, the omens in the flight of eagles. When her father fell in a skirmish against a rival tribe, a conflict she later learned had been subtly fanned by Persian agents seeking to destabilize the region, Tamiris, then barely a woman, had stepped into the void. With her skill in battle, her fierce determination, and a charisma that drew warriors to her banner, she had not only secured her father's legacy but expanded it, becoming the undisputed queen. She had married a strong chieftain, Spargapais's father, who had respected her power and fought by her side until a lung fever took him 5 winters past. Since then she had ruled alone, her son her constant companion and heir apparent. Her primary goal had always been simple: to preserve the freedom and way of life of the Masajte, to ensure her son inherited a proud and unbowed people. Cyrus's proposal and her rejection changed everything. The fragile peace on their southern border was about to shatter. Her duty was clear: protect her people. But a cold premonition settled in her heart, a whisper from the wind that spoke of blood and sacrifice. The rejection, as Spargapais's predicted, did not sit well in the grand halls of Persepolis or Ecbatana. Cyrus, the empire builder, the man who had bent nations to his will, was not accustomed to defiance, especially from a barbarian queen ruling over what he considered untamed wilderness. His envoys returned with Tamiris's stark refusal, and the Persian court buzzed with indignation. Cyrus, however, was a patient predator. War was inevitable, but he would choose the time and place. Scouts soon brought word to Tamiris: Persian forces were massing south of the Araxes. Engineers were assembling materials for a bridge of boats. Cyrus was not coming to talk. He was coming to take. Tamiris summoned her war council, the chieftains of the allied Masajte clans. They gathered in the open air, the wind tugging at their horsehair cloaks, their faces grim. Cyrus crosses the Araxes, Tamiris announced, her voice cutting through the wind. He means to make our lands his own. He believes his numbers and his iron will grant him victory. An old chieftain, grizzled and scarred, spat on the ground. Let him come. The steppe has swallowed proud armies before. His soldiers are not used to our ways, our speed. Indeed, Tamiris agreed, but we will not meet him head-on at the river. That is what he expects. He has the numbers for a pitched battle there. We will draw him in. Let him cross. Let him taste the emptiness of our lands, the harshness of our sun. Let his supply lines stretch thin. We will fight him on our terms, when he is deep within our heartland, tired and disoriented. Spargapaises, standing tall beside her, nodded. A wise strategy, mother. We bleed them, harry their flanks, strike like the eagle and vanish like the mist. His youthful eagerness was tempered by a growing understanding of the grim realities of war. He was to command a significant portion of their cavalry, a responsibility that weighed on him, yet also filled him with a fierce pride. And so, as Cyrus's vast army, a river of men and steel, began to cross the hastily constructed bridge over the Araxes, the Masajte were not there to meet them. They had faded back into the steppes, a phantom force, watching, waiting. Cyrus, finding the crossing unopposed, might have felt a flicker of contempt, or perhaps a cautious unease. He advanced into the plains, his legions marching under the blazing sun. The land was vast, empty, offering little sustenance. His scouts reported Masajte horsemen flickering at the edges of their vision, too swift to engage, always just out of reach. Days turned into a week. The Persian army pushed deeper. Then Cyrus's scouts found it, an abandoned Masajte encampment. It was hastily deserted, it seemed, but surprisingly well stocked. There were stores of dried meat, grains, and most notably a large cache of wineskins, strong, unwatered wine, a luxury the nomadic Masajte, who mostly drank fermented mare's milk, rarely indulged in. Cyrus, a master of deception himself, saw an opportunity. He conferred with his trusted general, Harpagus. "They flee before us," Cyrus said, a thin smile on his lips. "But they are not yet broken. We will leave a portion of our force here, the weaker contingents, and make a show of retreating. They will think us fearful, disorganized. They will return to reclaim their camp and indulge in this unexpected bounty. Then, Harpagus, you will fall upon them when they are drunk and unsuspecting." Harpagus, a veteran of many campaigns, bowed. "As you command, great king." Cyrus left a significant yet deliberately less formidable part of his army under Harpagus's command within the wine-baited camp. Then, with the bulk of his forces, he made a conspicuous show of retreating several leagues back towards the Araxes. The ruse worked. Massagetes scouts, observing the Persian withdrawal, reported back to Tamiris and Spargapices. There was debate. Was it a genuine retreat, a sign of Cyrus's weakening resolve, or a trap? Spargapices, eager for a decisive blow, argued for an attack. "They leave their spoils, mother, and a weakened rearguard. We can crush them, seize their supplies, and show Cyrus the price of invasion." Tamiris felt a prickle of unease. It seemed too easy. Cyrus was too cunning for such a blatant error. "Be wary, my son," she cautioned. "A cornered wolf is dangerous, but a retreating lion may be luring you into its jaws." Yet the lure of a tangible victory, of striking a blow against the invaders, was strong, and the presence of the wine, reported by scouts, was an unusual detail. Perhaps Cyrus truly underestimated their discipline. Reluctantly, Tamiris agreed to a reconnaissance in force, led by Spargapices. "Strike hard and fast if the opportunity is clear," she instructed, "but do not overextend. If there is any doubt, withdraw." Spargapices, his heart pounding with anticipation, led his chosen warriors, the swiftest and boldest of the Massagetae cavalry, towards the abandoned camp. They found it as reported, the Persians gone, save for the contingent left by Cyrus, and the tempting array of supplies, especially the wine. What happened next would become the searing core of Tamiris's grief. The Massagetae warriors, having endured days of parched throats and meagre rations, fell upon the wineskins with joyous abandon. Spargapices, though he partook more sparingly, allowed his men their indulgence, believing the main Persian threat had indeed retreated. He underestimated the potency of the undiluted Persian wine and the discipline required to resist such a sudden bounty after hardship. As night fell and the Massagetae camp grew loud with drunken revelry, Harpagus, who had hidden his forces nearby, gave the signal. The Persians fell upon the unsuspecting and incapacitated Massagetae with brutal efficiency. The slaughter was terrible. Many were cut down before they could even rise, their senses dulled by wine. Spargapices, realizing the catastrophic error too late, fought like a cornered lion, rallying a few of his warriors. But they were outnumbered, outmaneuvered. He was taken alive, bound and dragged before Harpagus. The shame of his capture, the realization that his recklessness had led to the decimation of his men, was a wound deeper than any blade could inflict. According to some tales, when presented with the opportunity by a sympathetic captor during a lull, Spargapices, overwhelmed by dishonor, used a hidden dagger to take his own life. Other accounts say he was simply executed later. The precise details mattered little to the storm that was about to break. Word of the disaster, and of Spargapices' capture and death, reached Tamiris like a physical blow. One moment she was a queen, strategist, leader. The next, she was a mother whose world had been ripped apart. The yurt seemed to spin. The wind outside, once a familiar song, now howled with a mournful, accusing voice. Something inside her, the part that had held caution, diplomacy, even a sliver of hope for a resolution short of total war, shattered. It was replaced by a grief so vast it threatened to consume her, a grief that quickly hardened into something else, a cold, diamond-hard rage. Her warriors found her hours later, not weeping, but standing ramrod straight, her face a mask of stone, her grey eyes burning with an unnatural light. The paint on her temples, the faint blue woad patterns, seemed to pulse with a life of their own. She summoned her remaining chieftains. Her voice, when she spoke, was devoid of its earlier warmth, stripped bare to pure, unadulterated resolve. "Cyrus has taken my son," she said, each word a chip of ice. "He has tricked us. He has celebrated with wine while our warriors bled. He calls himself a great king, a builder of empires. I call him a glutton for blood." She looked at each chieftain, her gaze unwavering. "He came to our land seeking conquest. He has found treachery and death. Now he will find vengeance." Her hand went to the wolf-head brooch at her cloak. "I swore an oath when I became queen to protect the Massagetae. I swore an oath as a mother to protect my son. Cyrus has made me break one. he will not live to boast of it. She raised her voice, and it carried across the assembled warriors a clarion call of incandescent fury. Hear me, sons and daughters of the steppes. Cyrus came for land, he came for glory, he has spilled the blood of my blood, the future of our people. I swear by the spirits of our ancestors, by the eternal sky above and the sacred earth beneath, I will give Cyrus his fill of blood. I will hunt him down. I will make the ground run red with Persian blood. His great army will be carrion for the vultures, and his proud head will know a thirst only blood can quench. A roar went up from the Massagetai, a sound of pure primal fury, of grief transformed into a terrible weapon. Tamiris was no longer just their queen. She was their vengeance, their storm, the embodiment of their collective rage. Cyrus the Great, master strategist, conqueror of nations, had made a fatal miscalculation. He had awakened a mother's fury, and the steppe itself seemed to tremble in anticipation of the reckoning. The sun rose over the plains like a freshly honed blade, its light sharp and unforgiving. Tamiris, mounted on her black war stallion, addressed her assembled host. They were fewer now, after Spargapais's disastrous encounter, but their spirit was a single white-hot flame of vengeance. Ash and ochre were smeared on their faces, not as decoration, but as a mark of their deadly intent. This was no longer a war for territory. It was a sacred duty, a blood feud against the man who had shattered their queen's heart and insulted their people. Cyrus, emboldened by the success of his wine trap and the reported death of Tamiris's heir, had advanced once more, confident that the Massagetai spirit was broken. He had underestimated the resilience of the steppe people, and more critically, the terrifying power of a queen transformed by grief into an avatar of retribution. He expected scattered resistance, a final, desperate stand. He did not expect the whirlwind. Tamiris did not wait for Cyrus to choose the battlefield. She knew this land as Cyrus knew the corridors of his palaces. She chose a wide, undulating plain, broken by patches of tall grass and shallow depressions, perfect terrain for her cavalry to maneuver, to appear and disappear, to strike from unexpected angles. She had Harpagus' remaining forces, those who had survived her initial furious assault on their now recovered camp after news of Spargapais's reached her, pinned down, a secondary concern. Her target was Cyrus himself. The Persian army, a vast, disciplined machine, marched into the chosen plain. Their infantry formed solid blocks, spearmen and archers arrayed in their traditional formations. Their own cavalry guarded the flanks. They were the conquerors of the world, confident in their training, their numbers, their emperor. Then the Massagetai attacked. It was not a single, clumsy charge. It was a storm. Tamiris, her black horse seeming to devour the ground, was at the forefront, her composite bow singing, her sword a silver flash in the sun. Her warriors, men and women alike, swept across the plain in waves, a tide of horseflesh and screaming fury. They were wraiths, firing arrows with deadly precision from horseback, wheeling, charging, retreating, only to charge again from a different direction. The famed Parthian shot, firing backwards at full gallop, was a Massageti specialty, and Persian shields bristled with their deadly shafts. Cyrus, from his command post on a slight rise, watched the chaos unfold with a dawning sense of disbelief. His disciplined lines were being harassed, broken into smaller pockets, surrounded. The Massaged fought with a ferocity he had rarely witnessed, a desperate, joyful abandon that unnerved his veteran soldiers. They seemed to care nothing for their own lives, only for felling Persians. Tamiris was everywhere. Her presence was a beacon for her warriors, a terror for the enemy. She cut down a Persian standard-bearer, the eagle standard falling into the dust. She rallied a wavering group of her own horsemen, leading them in a devastating charge that shattered a line of Persian spearmen. Her voice, hoarse from battle cries, carried above the din, urging her people on, her words laced with Spargapais's name, a litany of grief and rage. The battle raged for hours under the merciless sun. The plain became a charnel house, the dust thick with the coppery scent of blood and the screams of the dying. Cyrus, seeing his flanks crumbling and his centre struggling to hold, ordered his elite guard, the Immortals, into the fray. For a time their disciplined valour seemed to stem the Massagetai tide, but Tamiris was relentless. She sought Cyrus. Her eyes scanned the battlefield, a hawk seeking its prey. She knew that as long as Cyrus lived, the threat remained. This war would only end with his death. Finally, through a gap in the swirling melee, she saw him, Cyrus, surrounded by his immortals, attempting to rally his forces. He was unmistakable, his regal bearing, his ornate armor. With a wild cry that was more animal than human, Tamiris wheeled her stallion and charged, a small band of her fiercest warriors thundering at her heels. They smashed into the immortals like a battering ram. The elite Persian guards, caught by surprise by the sheer ferocity of the Queen's personal assault, gave ground. Swords clashed, men screamed and fell. Tamiris fought with the strength of 10, her grief a burning inferno within her, fueling her every blow. She saw a path to Cyrus, a fleeting opening. She urged her horse forward, her sword raised. Cyrus, a seasoned warrior himself, met her charge. Their blades met with a clang that seemed to silence the battlefield for a heartbeat. For a moment it was queen against king, steppe against empire, vengeance against ambition. The details of that final, desperate struggle became the stuff of legend. Some said Tamiris, her arm guided by the spirits of her ancestors and the ghost of her son, disarmed Cyrus with a blinding flurry of blows. Others claimed Cyrus, already wounded and seeing the battle lost, was overwhelmed by her sheer unstoppable fury. What is known is that Cyrus the Great, King of Kings, founder of the Achaemenid Empire, fell. Whether by Tamiris' own hand or by one of her warriors in that final frenzied clash, he was struck down. His fall sent a shockwave of despair through the remaining Persian ranks. Their king was dead, their will to fight shattered. The battle turned into a rout. The Persians, leaderless and demoralized, broke and fled. The Massagetae, their queen's vow echoing in their hearts, hunted them down with merciless efficiency. The plain, which had been golden with dry grass that morning, was now stained crimson. When the dust finally began to settle, and the last echoes of battle faded into the vast silence of the steppe, Tamiris, splattered with blood and grime, her breath coming in ragged gasps, stood victorious. Her people had paid a terrible price, but they had done the impossible. They had defeated Cyrus. They had broken his army. She ordered her warriors to find Cyrus's body. It was located amidst a pile of slain immortals, his royal insignia unmistakable even in death. Tamiris dismounted, her legs unsteady, the adrenaline of battle slowly ebbing, leaving behind a vast, aching emptiness where her rage had burned so brightly. She looked down at the face of the man who had brought such desolation to her land, such agony to her heart. His eyes were open, staring sightlessly at the indifferent sky. "You came for blood, Cyrus," she whispered, her voice hoarse. "You thirsted for it." She gave an order, a large, empty wineskin, perhaps one of those captured from Cyrus's own supplies earlier, was brought to her. With grim ceremony, she had Cyrus's head severed from his body. Then, holding the gory trophy aloft for a moment, she plunged it deep into the wineskin, which her warriors had begun to fill with the blood of slain Persian soldiers gathered from the battlefield. "Drink your fill, Cyrus." Her voice, though weary, rang out across the blood-soaked plain, a sound of terrible, immutable justice. "Drink your fill of the blood you so craved." News of the catastrophic Persian defeat and the death of Cyrus spread like wildfire across the ancient world. Empires trembled. The name of Tamiris, the warrior queen of the Massagetae, was spoken in hushed, awestruck tones from the Indus Valley to the shores of the Aegean. The mighty Achaemenid Empire, seemingly invincible, had been brought to its knees, not by another great king, but by a grieving mother from the wild steppes who had dared to defy its power. The Persians, in time, would retrieve what remained of Cyrus and bury him with honor in his tomb at Pasargadae. But the stain of his final, humiliating defeat at the hands of a barbarian queen would linger in their imperial memory for generations. For Tamiris and the Massagetae, the victory was absolute, yet profoundly costly. They had preserved their freedom, but at the price of their queen's son and countless warriors. Tamiris had enacted her terrible vengeance, but the joy of it, if any, was hollow, overshadowed by the lingering ache of her loss. And then, as if her purpose in the grand tapestry of history had been fulfilled, Tamiris, queen of the Massagetae, slayer of Cyrus the Great, began to fade from the direct gaze of chroniclers. No grand monuments marked her later reign, no stone tablets recorded her decrees. Her people were nomads, their histories carried in song, in firelight tales, in the bloodlines of their descendants. She ruled her people, it is said, with wisdom and strength for many more years, the memory of her great victory ensuring their borders remained inviolate for a generation. She never remarried, her heart forever holding the image of her lost son and the terrible price of his redemption. Her legend, however, did not fade. It rode on the winds of the steppe, a story whispered by mothers to their children, by warriors around their campfires, a story of a queen who faced an empire, a mother who avenged her son, a woman who refused to be broken. Tamiris became more than a historical figure. She became a symbol of defiance, of the untamed spirit that no empire could truly conquer, a fierce, haunting presence in the vast, silent memory of the land. And in the tales told under the endless sky, she rides still, her grey eyes fixed on the horizon, a storm given human form, forever the queen of the steppes, unbowed, unforgettable. The immediate aftermath of the great battle was a sombre affair. The Massagetais, though victorious, moved with a heavy wariness. The cost of their freedom had been etched onto their faces in the empty spaces left by fallen comrades, brothers, husbands and sons. Tamiris herself oversaw the rites for her fallen warriors, her grief for Spargapases a raw, open wound that even the bloody satisfaction of Cyrus's death could not entirely staunch. The traditional sky burials were performed, the bodies of the brave left on raised platforms for the steppe eagles and the cleansing sun, their spirits freed to ride the eternal winds. For Cyrus, no such honour was given from their hands. After her symbolic act with the wineskin of blood, his headless corpse was left for his own people to eventually claim, a stark message of Massagetais justice. The head itself she kept for a time, a grim reminder of her vow fulfilled, before ordering it buried deep within an unmarked grave on the steppe, lost forever to Persian veneration or defilement. Let the earth that he sought to conquer now claim him entirely, she had decreed, her voice devoid of triumph, only a profound exhaustion. Life in the encampment slowly returned to its familiar rhythms, but it was irrevocably changed. Spargapais's absence was a palpable void. He had been the heir, the vibrant young warrior poised to lead. Now the question of succession, though not immediate, hung in the air. Tamiris was still strong, still revered, but the future felt less certain. She threw herself into the duties of queenship with a renewed, almost feverish intensity, as if activity could fill the chasm in her soul. She reinforced alliances with neighbouring Scythian tribes, her victory over Cyrus lending her immense prestige and bargaining power. Trade routes that had been threatened by Persian encroachment were resecured. The Massagetais prospered, their herds grew, and their warriors, though fewer, were held in even greater awe. Yet Tamiris herself became more solitary. The easy laughter that had once graced her lips was seldom heard. She would spend long hours riding alone across the vast plains, her black stallion her only companion, as if seeking solace in the sheer immensity of the land her son had died to protect. The other chieftains noted the change. Her strategic brilliance remained. Her decisions were just, her leadership unquestioned, but the fire in her eyes, once a beacon of fierce joy and determination, now often held a distant, haunted look. She never spoke of Cyrus again, except when necessitated by matters of state or historical recounting for the younger generation. The wineskin, once emptied of its grim contents, was burned in a sacred fire, its purpose served, its memory an unspoken shadow. Years passed. Young warriors who had been children during the Great War now formed the core of the Massagetais defence. They knew Tamiris primarily as the living legend, the queen who had slain the world's greatest king. Spargapases became a heroic figure in their oral traditions, the noble prince whose sacrifice had fueled the mother queen's righteous fury. Tamiris, seeing the new generation rise, began to subtly prepare for her own eventual departure. She identified promising young leaders among the clans, testing their mettle, their wisdom, their loyalty not just to her, but to the Massagetais way of life. She never named a direct successor, for that was not entirely their way. The clans would have a say. But she guided, she mentored, ensuring that the strength she had fought so hard to preserve would endure. One harsh winter, when the snows lay thick upon the steppes and the wind howled like a grieving wolf, Tamiris fell ill. The lung fever that had claimed her husband years ago now settled in her own chest. The tribe's shamans and healers did all they could, their chants and poultices filling her yurt, but the queen's formidable strength began to wane. Her chieftains gathered, their faces etched with concern. She met with them one last time, propped up on her furs, her breath shallow, but her grey eyes still holding a spark of their old fire. "The Massagetais are strong," she rasped, her voice a pale shadow of its former power. "You have learned the lessons of unity, of vigilance. Cyrus is long dead, but empires have long memories and new ambitions always rise. Trust in your own strength, in the spirit of our ancestors, in the land that sustains us. Never trade your freedom for chains, no matter how gilded." She looked towards the yurt's opening, where a sliver of the vast snow-covered plain was visible. "Spargapices awaits me. I have kept the steppes free for him, for all of you." A few days later, as a pale winter sun struggled to break through the heavy clouds, Tomiris, queen of the Massagetais, breathed her last. Her passing was not met with wails of despair, but with a profound, respectful silence that settled over the entire encampment, a silence as vast as the steppes themselves. They prepared her for her final journey according to their most ancient customs. Dressed in her finest leathers, her scarred hands resting on the hilt of her favourite sword, her raven hair braided with the river stones and eagle feathers of her youth. They did not build her a grand tomb of stone to be plundered by future conquerors. Instead, they chose a high, windswept tor, overlooking the endless plains she had loved and defended. There they placed her on a simple wooden bier, exposed to the sky, the wind, and the sun, for the steppe eagles to carry her spirit to the ancestral hunting grounds where Spargapices, her husband, and her warrior father awaited. Her black war stallion, old now but still proud, was sacrificed nearby, to serve her in the afterlife, its noble spirit loose to gallop forever alongside hers. Her weapons, her bow, her quiver of arrows, were placed beside her. As the sun set, painting the snow-covered plains in hues of blood-red and funeral purple, the Massagetais chieftains and warriors stood vigil, their torches flickering in the biting wind. They sang the old songs, the epic tales of their people, and now woven into those ancient refrains was the new immortal lay of Tomiris. Tomiris the Avenger, Tomiris the Queen, Tomiris, the mother of the steppes, who had looked an empire in the eye and made it blink, who had drunk deep of sorrow and emerged a legend. Her physical presence was gone, but her legacy was embedded in the very soul of the Massagetais. For generations, whenever a threat loomed on the horizon, whenever a chieftain spoke of courage or a mother mourned a loss, the name of Tomiris would be invoked. Her story became their shield, their inspiration, a testament to the enduring power of a free people, led by a queen whose love for her child and her land had been fierce enough to shatter the ambitions of the world's most powerful. King. Her story became their shield, their inspiration, a testament to the enduring power of a free people led by a queen whose love for her child and her land had been fierce enough to shatter the ambitions of the world's most powerful. The winds of the steppe would forever carry her name, a whisper of defiance, a promise of resilience, a legend etched not in stone, but in the unbreakable spirit of a people who called the wild, open plains their home. And somewhere, in the heart of that wind, it was said, a raven-haired queen still rode, her grey eyes blazing, forever guarding the freedom she had bought with blood and sorrow. The legacy of Tomiris did not dissipate with the melting snows of that first spring after her passing. Instead, it solidified, becoming a cornerstone of Massagetais identity. The chieftains she had subtly mentored rose to prominence, guiding the confederation of clans with a wisdom that bore her imprint. They remembered her warnings about the long memories of empires and the ever-present threat of ambition from beyond their borders. While no single leader immediately commanded the same absolute authority Tomiris had wielded, her stature having been forged in a crucible of unique crisis and personal tragedy, a council of elders and proven war leaders ensured stability. The Persians under Cyrus's successors like Cambyses II and later Darius I were indeed occupied with consolidating their vast domains and pursuing conquests in other directions: Egypt, Thrace, the Aegean Islands. The crushing defeat Cyrus had suffered at the hands of the Massagetais served as a potent deterrent for any immediate thoughts of renewed adventures into the northeastern steppes. The tales of Tomiris's ferocity, likely exaggerated with each retelling in Persian military camps, painted the Massagete as an almost preternatural force, best left undisturbed. For a time, an uneasy but effective peace settled over the Araxes' frontier. The Massagete patrolled their lands, their horsemen ever vigilant, the name of Tomiris a silent watchword on their lips. Trade, which had always been a lifeblood for the nomadic peoples, acting as intermediaries between distant civilizations, flourished once more. Massagete merchants, known for their hard bargaining and fierce independence, carried goods along the nascent Silk Roads. Their passage respected, partly due to the lingering fear and awe inspired by their warrior queen's reputation. They brought back not just material goods, but also news of the wider world, of shifting powers and distant conflicts, information that the ruling council used to navigate the complex geopolitics of the era. The story of Tomiris and Spargapeses became the central epic of their people. Bards and storytellers would recite it during long winter nights, their voices rising and falling with the drama of the tale, the crackling firelight illuminating the rapt faces of their audience. Children grew up hearing of the great queen's sorrow, her vow, the cunning of Cyrus, the tragic fate of the prince, and the final, terrible vengeance. It was more than entertainment. It was a moral lesson, a historical record, a source of collective pride, and a reminder of the sacrifices made for their freedom. The details might shift slightly with each telling, the number of Persians slain, the exact words of Tomiris's vow, but the core truth, the triumph of their defiant queen, remained immutable. In these retellings, Spargapeses was often portrayed not as reckless, but as heroically brave, lured into a dishonorable trap by an overwhelmingly perfidious enemy. His death became a martyrdom that sanctified his mother's subsequent actions. Tomiris herself was depicted as an almost divine instrument of justice, her rage righteous, her victory preordained by the ancestral spirits of the steppe. The grim detail of Cyrus's head in the wineskin of blood was never omitted. It was the ultimate symbol of justice served, a warning to all future tyrants. Generations later, when the Achaemenid Empire faced new challenges and its grip on its vast territories began to show fissures, the Massagete remained a potent, independent force on its periphery. Other steppe peoples, like the Scythians and Saka, who shared cultural affinities with them, often looked to the Massagete as elder brethren, their shared history of resisting Persian expansionism, creating bonds of solidarity. The legend of Tomiris served as a pan-Scythian touchstone of defiance. Archaeologists centuries hence would find little in the way of grand Massagete cities or monumental architecture. Their legacy was not in stone, but in their nomadic adaptability, their equestrian skill, and the fierce spirit of independence that Tomiris had so powerfully embodied. Perhaps a few burial mounds, kurgans, rich with grave goods for warrior chieftains, would hint at their culture. But the truest testament to Tomiris's reign was the continued existence of her people as a free and distinct entity long after many other, seemingly more powerful, nations had been absorbed or erased by the tides of empire. Her story, initially recorded by outsiders like Herodotus of Halicarnassus, who heard it from Greek traders or Persian sources, would eventually travel far beyond the steppes. The Greeks, with their complex relationship of rivalry and grudging admiration for the Persians, found in Tomiris a compelling figure, a barbarian queen who had humbled the great king. Roman historians, too, would later recount the tale, often using it as a moral exemplar about the dangers of hubris or the surprising strength found in so-called lesser peoples. Through these written accounts, filtered and reinterpreted though they were, the name of Tomiris echoed down through the centuries, ensuring her place not just in the oral traditions of her own descendants, but in the broader annals of world history. She became a figure studied by military strategists for her unconventional tactics, by feminists as an early example of powerful female leadership, by artists and writers as a muse for works depicting courage, vengeance, and the eternal struggle against tyranny. But for the people of the steppes themselves, the true inheritors of her legacy, Tomiris was never just a historical footnote or a literary trope. She was the ancestral mother, the queen who had faced down the darkness and emerged, bloodied but unbent. Her spirit was believed to still ride with their war parties, to whisper guidance in the councils of their elders, to be present in the fierce love a mother felt for her child. The wind across the plains, they said, still carried the echo of her battle cry, a timeless reminder that freedom is precious, and that even the greatest empires can be brought low by the unyielding will of those who refuse to kneel. And so, the Queen of the Massagetæ, though long turned to dust and legend, lived on, her story a fierce, proud heartbeat in the vast, silent chest of the steppes. The enduring power of Tomiris's story manifested in peculiar ways as the centuries unspooled. Neighbouring cultures, even those with a history of skirmishes with the Massagetæ, incorporated elements of her legend into their own folklore. Sometimes she was a fearsome war goddess, a figure to be propitiated. Other times, a cautionary tale about the perils of provoking the people of the horse. The exact borders of the Massagetæ lands might shift, their tribal confederation might evolve, absorbing or being absorbed by other nomadic groups like the Saka or Alans, but the core narrative of Tomiris's defiance remained a potent cultural marker in the region. When Alexander the Great, centuries after Cyrus, swept through Persia and pushed towards the Jaxartes River, the ancient name for the Syr Darya, often associated with the northern extent of Massagetæ influence, his own historians would have been aware of Cyrus's fate in these same unforgiving lands. The formidable reputation of the steppe warriors, descendants of those who had defeated a Persian great king, would have informed Alexander's own cautious and often brutal campaigns against the Scythian peoples he encountered. He, too, would learn the difficulty of pinning down and defeating these elusive horse-borne archers, a testament to the enduring effectiveness of their way of war. A tradition Tomiris had expertly wielded. He, too, would learn the difficulty of pinning down and defeating these elusive horse-borne archers, a testament to the enduring effectiveness of their way of war, a tradition Tomiris had expertly comes. Further down the timeline, as new empires rose, the Parthians, the Sasanian Persians, and later the great Turkic and Mongol Khaganates, the steppes of Central Asia remained a crucible of conflict and cultural fusion. The specific name Massagetæ might fade from common parlance, assimilated into broader ethnic classifications, but the archetypal warrior queen, the fierce defender of her people's liberty, would resurface in new guises, in the legends of other nomadic heroines. The seed of Tomiris's story, her fierce independence and maternal rage, was too potent to be lost entirely. Even the way the Massagetæ treated their dead, particularly those of high status, might have carried echoes of Tomiris. While sky burial was common, the reverence for warrior queens or exceptionally powerful female figures, if any arose after her, would have been measured against her towering legend. Their burial rites, their grave goods, the songs sung at their passing, would all contain nuances reflecting the queen who had become their defining ancestor. The impact on Persian imperial psychology, though perhaps not openly admitted, was also significant. While later Achaemenid kings continued to be powerful, the northeastern frontier, the land of the Massagetæ and other Scythian tribes, was always treated with a degree of circumspection. It was a volatile region, difficult to control, inhabited by peoples who had proven they could deliver catastrophic defeats. The ghost of Cyrus's headless body, symbolically quenched of its thirst for blood, would have been a sobering image for any Persian strategist contemplating deep incursions into the steppes. It wasn't that they never campaigned there, but they did so with a caution born of historical trauma. Internally, among the Massagetæ, the Tomiris epic likely influenced gender roles, or at least perceptions of female capability. While steppe societies generally afforded women more agency and status than many sedentary cultures, Tomiris's example, a woman who not only ruled but also led armies, out-strategized and personally defeated a great male conqueror, would have been a powerful affirmation of female strength and leadership potential. It wouldn't necessarily mean a matriarchal society, but it would ensure that women with talent and ambition were not easily dismissed. A girl showing aptitude with a bow or a keen strategic mind might be told, "You have the spirit of Tomiris in you." The very landscape, the wide plains, the winding rivers, the distant mountains that formed the backdrop of her story, became imbued with her presence. A particular hill might be known as Tomiris's Watch, a spring as Spargapeis's Lament. These were not official monuments, but living landmarks in the collective memory passed down through generations, tying the people to their ancestral lands through the saga of their greatest queen. Their connection to the environment was thus deepened, not just as a source of sustenance, but as a witness to their history, their triumphs, and their sorrows. As new religions and belief systems eventually found their way onto the steppes, Zoroastrianism from Persia, Buddhism from the East, eventually Islam, they would interact with the older shamanistic traditions of the Massagetes. The legend of Tomiris, predating these global faiths, would likely be adapted, her spirit perhaps seen as a powerful local guardian, or her story reinterpreted to fit new moral frameworks, yet always retaining its core of fierce maternal love and unyielding justice. Even the act of storytelling itself, the sacred duty of the bards, was elevated by the richness of her tale. To recite the epic of Tomiris was not just to entertain, but to educate, to inspire, to reaffirm the values of courage, loyalty, and the unquenchable thirst for freedom. The bards who could tell her story with the most passion, the most detail, the most emotional depth were highly esteemed, for they were the keepers of the flame, the guardians of the Massagetes soul. Thus, Tomiris, though her bones had long since mingled with the dust of the steppe, remained a living force. Her legacy was not in crumbling stone or faded parchments, but in the fierce glance of a Massagetei warrior, the proud bearing of a steppe woman, the defiant cry of a nomad refusing to be chained. It was in the wind that swept across the endless grass, a wind that forever whispered her name. Tomiris, queen, avenger, legend. Her victory was not just a moment in time, but an echo that resonated through the ages, a testament to the enduring power of the human spirit when pushed to its absolute limit. The enduring narrative of Tomiris also served as a form of unwritten law or moral code for the Massagetes. Her unwavering commitment to her people's sovereignty became a benchmark against which future leaders were judged. Any chieftain who seemed too eager to appease foreign powers or who prioritized personal gain over the welfare of the clans would inevitably be contrasted unfavorably with the memory of Tomiris, who had sacrificed her own son and risked annihilation rather than submit. This created a powerful internal pressure for leaders to act with integrity and courage, lest they be seen as betraying her sacred legacy. Moreover, the story of Cyrus's treachery, the wine trap that led to Spargapais's death, instilled a deep-seated caution within Massagete diplomacy. While they engaged in trade and formed alliances, they approached negotiations with outside powers, especially large, settled empires, with a profound skepticism. Promises were weighed carefully, and the potential for deceit was always considered. Remember Cyrus's wine might have become a common saying among their envoys and chieftains, a shorthand reminder to remain vigilant and not be swayed by superficial gestures of goodwill or apparent weakness in an adversary. This wasn't paranoia, but a hard-won wisdom, paid for in blood. The very nature of Massagetes warfare, already adapted to the steppe environment, was likely reinforced by the lessons of the war against Cyrus. The emphasis on mobility, hit-and-run tactics, the use of horse archers to harass and attrite a larger, less mobile enemy, these were not just effective strategies, but were now imbued with the glory of Tomiris's victory. Young warriors learning these techniques were not just mastering skills, they were emulating the heroes who had fought alongside their great queen. This created a strong martial tradition, a sense of cultural pride in their distinctive way of fighting, which further contributed to their resilience against external threats. Even in times of internal strife, which were inevitable among a confederation of proud and sometimes rival clans, the memory of Tomiris could serve as a unifying call. Elders might invoke her name and her sacrifices to remind feuding chieftains that their true enemies lay beyond their borders, and that disunity was the surest path to subjugation, the very fate Tomiris had fought so fiercely to prevent. Her legend thus became a tool for internal cohesion, a shared heritage that transcended individual clan loyalties. The symbolic power of certain objects or animals might also have been amplified by association with her. The wolf, if it was indeed a totem or a significant animal in their cosmology, would have gained further reverence if Tomiris was strongly linked to it, perhaps through her personal insignia or a significant event in her life. The black stallion she rode in the final battle, might have become a symbol of indomitable spirit, with black horses being particularly prized among their war herds. These subtle cultural currents would ripple through their society, shaping their art, their beliefs, and their daily lives in ways that might not always be consciously traced back to her, but were nonetheless part of her enduring influence. Consider also the psychological impact on Masagetai women. In a world where women in many societies were relegated to domestic roles, the ever-present story of Tomiris provided a powerful counter-narrative. It demonstrated that a woman could be a supreme ruler, a brilliant military commander, and a figure of ultimate authority. Her power derived not just from lineage, but from her own capabilities and character. This didn't mean every Masagetai woman became a warrior, but it created a cultural space where female strength, intelligence, and leadership were not seen as aberrations, but as potential attributes. It would have fostered a sense of self-worth and possibility among Masagetai girls growing up hearing her epic. Furthermore, the cyclical nature of life on the steppes, the harsh winters, the renewal of spring, the constant movement with the herds, resonated with the themes of loss and resilience in Tomiris' story. Just as the land endured and regenerated, so too had the Masagetai people endured their darkest hour and emerged stronger. Tomiris' personal journey from devastating grief to triumphant vengeance mirrored this natural cycle, making her story feel intrinsically tied to the very rhythms of their existence. And so, the Queen of the Steppes lived on, not as a static statue in a forgotten city, but as a dynamic force within the heart of her people. Her tale was a living thing, adapting with each generation, yet retaining its essential truth. It was a warning to would-be conquerors, an inspiration to her descendants, and a timeless saga of a mother's love, a queen's duty, and a warrior's unquenchable spirit. The winds that swept across the Araxes and over the vast grassy plains carried more than just dust and the scent of wild herbs. They carried the immortal legend of Tomiris, forever etched into the soul of the land she had defended with such terrible, magnificent fury. Her name was a vow, her story a shield, her memory a fire that would never be extinguished. As the Masagetai Confederation navigated the centuries, their oral tradition remained the primary vehicle for transmitting the Tomiris epic. This was not a weakness, but a strength, for it allowed the story to breathe and adapt while retaining its core emotional power. Different bards might emphasize different aspects of the tale. One might focus on the strategic brilliance of Tomiris, another on the pathos of Spargapais's death, a third on the sheer, visceral satisfaction of Cyrus's downfall. This multifaceted approach kept the legend vibrant and relevant to changing circumstances. If a new threat emerged from a particular direction, the bards might subtly highlight Tomiris' vigilance against enemies from that quarter. If internal leadership seemed weak, her decisiveness and strength would be emphasized. The material culture of the Masagetai, though not monumental, would also have reflected her influence. The patterns woven into their textiles, the carvings on their wooden drinking cups, the ornamentation of their horse tack, these might incorporate symbols associated with Tomiris or her victory. Perhaps a recurring motif of a swooping eagle, representing her swift attacks, or a stylized depiction of a wolf's head, if connected to her clan or personal totem, became more prevalent after her reign. These were not direct representations of the queen herself, as figural art of specific individuals might have been rare, but rather an infusion of her symbolic power into the everyday objects that defined their nomadic existence. Such items, traded or carried during migrations, would disseminate these symbolic markers across a wide geographic area. The training of young Masagetai warriors would invariably include recitations of the Tomiris epic. It served as a practical lesson in their traditional fighting style, highlighting the importance of horsemanship, archery, and coordinated swarm tactics. But more importantly, it was a lesson in morale and psychological warfare. The story taught them that even a numerically superior and technologically advanced enemy could be defeated if faced with unwavering resolve and righteous fury. It instilled in them the belief that they were the inheritors of a legacy of invincibility when defending their homeland, a powerful psychological advantage in any conflict. The role of women in Masagetai society, already relatively prominent, would have found continual reinforcement in the figure of Tomiris. While not every woman was a warrior queen, her example validated female authority and participation in communal decisions, and even warfare. If a woman displayed exceptional courage or wisdom, comparisons to Tomiris would be natural and affirming. This fostered an environment where female contributions were valued, and where women could aspire to positions of influence without necessarily being seen as transgressing rigid gender norms. The memory of a queen leading them to their greatest victory was a potent antidote to any encroaching patriarchal ideas from neighboring sedentary cultures. Consider, too, the Massagetes relationship with death and the afterlife. Tomiris's grief for Spargapices and her determination to ensure his spirit was avenged would have resonated deeply with their own beliefs about honoring the dead and the importance of familial duty extending beyond the grave. Her own sky burial, a return to the elements, would have been seen as a fitting end for a queen so intrinsically connected to the land and the sky. This reinforced their traditional funerary practices, sanctifying them through association with their most revered ancestor. Even their interactions with the natural world, the vastness of the sky, the howl of the wind, the endurance of the steppe grasses through harsh seasons, would be coloured by her story. These elements were not just a backdrop to her life, but were seen as active participants in her saga, almost characters in their own right. The wind carried her spirit, the sky witnessed her vow, the earth drank the blood of her enemies. This animistic worldview, common among steppe peoples, was given a specific, powerful narrative focus through the epic of Tomiris. As new peoples and powers emerged on the steppes, Huns, Turks, Mongols, each bringing their own traditions and legends, the core story of Tomiris, in its Massagetai or Saka-Scythian iterations, would have contributed to a broader tapestry of Central Asian heroic folklore. Elements of her character, the avenging mother, the defiant queen, the slayer of a great king, might have been absorbed and reconfigured into the legends of these later groups, demonstrating the enduring archetypal power of her narrative. The specific name, Tomiris, might become obscured or altered over vast stretches of time, but the essence of her story, the triumph of fierce indigenous resistance against imperial ambition, would persist. Ultimately, the legacy of Tomiris was not merely about a military victory or a single act of vengeance. It was about the enduring spirit of a people who refused to be defined or dominated by external forces. She became the embodiment of their collective will to survive, to remain free, to live according to their own traditions under their own sky. Her story was a declaration that true power lies not in the size of an army or the breadth of an empire, but in the indomitable heart of those who know what they are fighting for. And as long as the steppes endured, and as long as people valued freedom and remembered the tales of their ancestors, the name of Tomiris would continue to echo, a timeless testament to a queen who dared to make an emperor drink his fill of blood. The diplomatic legacy of Tomiris's victory was subtle but profound. For generations, envoys from empires bordering the steppes approached Massagete territory with a caution that bordered on deference. They knew the stories. They knew that behind the polite greetings and the offer of trade goods lay a people who had humbled Cyrus the Great. This historical precedent gave Massagete negotiators an unspoken advantage. They didn't need to make overt threats. The shadow of Tomiris and her blood-filled wineskin did the talking for them. This allowed them to secure more favorable trade terms, maintain their territorial integrity with greater ease, and generally operate from a position of perceived strength that might not have always matched their actual military numbers at any given moment. This allowed them to secure more favorable trade terms, maintain their territorial integrity with greater ease, and generally operate from a position of perceived strength that might not have always matched their own. The psychological impact of her victory was a shield as potent as any phalanx of warriors. Furthermore, the tale of Tomiris likely influenced how the Massagete and related Scythian tribes perceived leadership qualities. While martial prowess was always valued, Tomiris had demonstrated more than just battlefield courage. She had shown strategic acumen in luring Cyrus, unwavering resolve in the face of devastating personal loss, and a profound understanding of her people's spirit. which she galvanized into an unstoppable force. Future leaders would be measured against this holistic image. A chieftain who was merely a brute warrior, lacking in cunning or the ability to inspire deep loyalty, would fall short of the Tamiris ideal. This fostered a more nuanced understanding of leadership, one that valued intelligence and charisma alongside bravery. The story also served as a powerful counter-narrative to the imperial propaganda emanating from empires like Persia. While Persian chronicles might emphasize the vastness of their domain and the civilizing mission of their kings, the Masagetai possessed their own epic, one where the civilized emperor was depicted as a treacherous, bloodthirsty tyrant, and the barbarian queen as the righteous avenger and defender of freedom. This gave the Masagetai a strong sense of their own cultural worth and historical significance, inoculating them against the kind of imperial chauvinism that sought to diminish or erase the identities of conquered peoples. They had their own hero, their own defining victory, and it was a story far more compelling to them than any tale of distant Persian grandeur. The tradition of female participation in warfare, or at least in positions of authority during wartime, would also have been strengthened. While the image of Amazon-like warrior women among the Scythians was a trope often sensationalized by Greek writers, the historical reality of women like Tamiris, who clearly wielded both political and military command, provided a tangible precedent. This didn't mean all Masagetai women were warriors, but it meant that the idea of a woman leading in times of crisis was not alien or unacceptable. It was part of their most celebrated historical triumph. This could have led to greater inclusion of women's voices in tribal councils, especially concerning matters of defense or intertribal alliances. Consider the long-term effect on the religious or spiritual beliefs of the Masagetai. Tamiris's vow to the ancestral spirits and the sacred earth, and the subsequent fulfillment of that vow, would have reinforced the perceived efficacy of these traditional spiritual practices. It demonstrated that their gods and spirits were powerful, capable of granting victory even against the most formidable human adversaries. This would have strengthened their adherence to indigenous shamanistic beliefs, making them perhaps more resistant to the later influx of foreign religions, or at least ensuring that new faiths had to accommodate or integrate with these deeply rooted ancestral traditions. Tamiris's triumph was a validation of their spiritual worldview. The landscape itself continued to be a silent repository of her legend. Specific river crossings, battle sites, even if their exact locations became blurred over time, and prominent natural features would be associated with her story. These weren't just geographical points, but were imbued with historical and emotional significance. To traverse these areas was to walk in the footsteps of Tamiris and her warriors, to feel a tangible connection to their heroic past. This deep bond between the people, their history, and their land was a powerful source of collective identity and resilience. Even the concept of justice among the Masagetai would have been shaped by her actions. Her vengeance against Cyrus, while brutal, was framed within their cultural context as a necessary and righteous response to treachery and the murder of her son. This underscored a societal value for retribution, for balancing wrongs, especially when honor and kinship were violated. While this could lead to blood feuds if unchecked, in the context of defending the tribe against external aggression, it was seen as a sacred duty. Tamiris provided the ultimate exemplar of this principle. Thus, the ripples of Tamiris's reign and her singular defining conflict with Cyrus spread far beyond the immediate historical event. They permeated Masagetai culture, politics, spirituality, and their very understanding of themselves and their place in the world. She was not just a queen who won a battle. She was an ancestral figure who shaped the destiny and the soul of her people for countless generations to come. Her legend a timeless beacon burning brightly in the heart of the vast wild steppes. The way Masagetai children were raised would also bear the indelible mark of the Tamiris saga. Storytelling was education, and her epic was a core curriculum. Through it, young boys learned about the ideals of courage, loyalty to their queen and tribe, and the skills of a warrior. They learned that true strength wasn't just physical prowess, but also cunning and endurance, qualities Tamiris had displayed in abundance. For young girls, the lessons were even more profound. Tamiris was not a distant, passive queen. She was an active agent, a leader, a strategist, a mother who drew unimaginable strength from her grief. This provided a powerful role model, showing that women could be central to the tribe's survival and glory, not just peripheral figures. It instilled in them a sense of their own potential worth and agency within their society. The rituals and ceremonies of the Massagetes, particularly those related to warfare or seasonal changes, might have incorporated elements or invocations related to her story. Perhaps before a major hunt or a defensive patrol, warriors would offer a prayer to the spirits that had guided Tamiris, or a bard would recite a particularly stirring passage from her epic to boost morale. Seasonal festivals celebrating the resilience of life on the steppes could draw parallels with Tamiris's own journey through devastating loss to ultimate triumph, reinforcing the theme of enduring strength. The artistic expressions of the Massagetes, though perhaps not taking the form of monumental portraiture, would still have found ways to honour her. Intricate patterns in metalwork on horse trappings or personal adornments might have subtly encoded symbols of her victory. A stylized representation of a severed head, a particular configuration of arrows, or a motif representing the Araxes River. These would be understood by those within the culture, a quiet but constant visual reminder of their defining historical moment. Such artistry, often portable, would travel with them, ensuring the symbolic presence of Tamiris was a constant in their nomadic lives. The Massagetes concept of kingship or queenship itself was undoubtedly shaped by her reign. While hereditary elements might have existed, Tamiris's own rise and her sustained rule were clearly based on merit, charisma, and the ability to command loyalty through strength and wisdom. This set a precedent that leadership was not merely a birthright, but had to be earned and continually proven. Any successor, male or female, would have been implicitly compared to her standard. This could have led to a more dynamic and responsive leadership structure, where incompetence or tyranny would be less tolerated, because the people held the vivid memory of what truly effective and inspiring rule looked like. Even their relationship with neighboring tribes might have been influenced. While the Massagetes were fierce in defending their own, Tamiris had also shown the ability to forge alliances, as implied by her leading a confederation of clans. The prestige gained from defeating Cyrus would have made the Massagetes sought-after allies and feared enemies. Her legacy might have encouraged a diplomatic approach that was firm but fair with those who respected their sovereignty, and ruthlessly uncompromising with those who sought to dominate them, mirroring her own dealings with Cyrus. Her legacy might have encouraged a diplomatic approach that was firm but fair with those who respected their sovereignty, and ruthlessly uncompromising with those who sought to dominate them, mirroring her own dealings with Wighugst. The very language of the Massagetes might have absorbed idioms or proverbs derived from her story. Phrases like a Tamiris heart for courage, or Cyrus's thirst for insatiable greed could have become embedded in their speech, enriching their vernacular and keeping her memory alive in everyday conversation. These linguistic fossils would carry her story forward, even if some of an epic's finer details were lost or altered over time. The psychological resilience of the Massaget people in the face of hardship, drought, harsh winters, the threat of other enemies, would have been bolstered by her example. If Queen Tamiris could endure the loss of her son and still lead her people to victory against the world's greatest empire, then surely they too could overcome their own challenges. Her story was a wellspring of fortitude, a reminder that even in the darkest times, the spirit could remain unbroken. It's also conceivable that the story of Tamiris influenced the Massagetes' perception of the other, particularly large sedentary empires. While trade was necessary, a fundamental mistrust born from Cyrus's treachery would likely persist. Empires were seen as inherently expansionist, deceitful, and a threat to the nomadic way of life. Tamiris's victory was a powerful affirmation that this way of life was not only viable but defensible, even superior in its own context. This worldview would shape their foreign policy and their interactions with settled civilizations for centuries. In essence, Tamiris became more than a queen. She became an ancestral spirit, a guardian of her people, a name inextricably woven into the fabric of their existence. Her life, her sorrow, her rage, and her ultimate triumph were not just events in the past, but living energies that continued to shape the Masajta present and future. Her legend was their most precious heirloom, a source of identity, strength, and an unyielding belief in their own destiny on the vast, wind-swept plains that she had fought so fiercely to keep free. The legend of Tomiris, passed down through the vibrant oral traditions of the Masajta, would have also played a crucial role in periods of internal consolidation or fragmentation. When different clans within the Confederation felt their bonds weakening, or when rival chieftains vied for greater influence, the unifying figure of Tomiris could be invoked by peacemakers or those seeking to preserve the collective strength. Bards might strategically recite the parts of her epic that emphasized her efforts to unite the Masajta tribes against Cyrus, highlighting how their combined strength under her leadership was the key to their survival and victory. Her story thus became a political tool, not for oppression, but for fostering a sense of shared purpose and identity that could transcend petty squabbles. Consider the rites of passage for young Masajta. As adolescents transitioned into adulthood, perhaps taking on warrior status or greater communal responsibilities, the Epic of Tomiris would serve as a profound initiation into the core values of their society. For young men, it was a call to emulate the bravery of Spargapices in his idealized form, and the warriors who fought with Tomiris, understanding that true manhood involved protecting the tribe and upholding its honor. For young women, Tomiris offered an even more expansive model, one of leadership, strategic thinking, fierce maternal protectiveness, and the capacity to wield ultimate authority. These rites would ensure that each new generation was deeply imbued with the foundational narrative of their people. The geographical awareness of the Masajta would also be shaped by her campaigns. The routes she took, the lands she defended, the place where the final battle against Cyrus was fought, even if its precise location became mythologized, these would be sacred, or at least historically resonant coordinates in their mental map of the steppes. Journeys through these areas would be more than just travel. They would be a form of pilgrimage, a retracing of their queen's heroic path. This connection to specific locales, tied to their most significant historical figure, would deepen their attachment to their ancestral territories, making the idea of ceding any part of it to outsiders even more unthinkable. This connection to specific locales, tied to their most significant historical figure, would deepen their attachment to their ancestral territories, making the idea of ceding any part of it to outsiders even more salus. The Masajta's understanding of justice, particularly in the context of intertribal relations or dealings with foreigners, would continue to be informed by Tomiris's ultimate response to Cyrus. While daily life required negotiation and compromise, her example stood as a stark reminder that certain betrayals, certain egregious violations of trust or kinship, demanded an absolute and uncompromising reckoning. This didn't necessarily mean constant warfare, but it meant that the Masajta would not be perceived as a people who could be wronged with impunity. The memory of Cyrus's fate served as a powerful deterrent. Even their artistic expressions, beyond mere symbols, might have developed in subtle ways. The cadence and rhythm of the bard's recitations of the Tomiris epic could have influenced their musical traditions. The dramatic emotional arc of her story, from peace to betrayal, grief, rage, and finally grim triumph, provided a rich template for expressive performance, perhaps involving specific melodies, gestures, or even ritualized enactments during important festivals. The story was so central that it would inevitably shape the forms through which they expressed their collective identity and creativity. The concept of honor within Masajta society would also be deeply intertwined with her legacy. Tomiris fought not just for survival, but for the honor of her people, her family, and herself, after Cyrus's initial slights and Spargapices' death. Her refusal to accept a subordinate position through marriage, her unwavering pursuit of vengeance. These were framed as acts of profound honor. This would reinforce a cultural code where personal and tribal honor were paramount, worth defending even at great cost. Over very long periods, as the Masatai interacted with and sometimes assimilated with other steppe cultures, the Tamiris legend would be one of their most significant cultural exports. Neighboring groups, hearing the power of the epic, might adopt or adapt it, fitting it into their own pantheons of heroes and heroines. Her name might change, details might be altered to fit local contexts, but the core archetype of the avenging warrior queen of the steppes would persist, a testament to the universality of its themes. Thus, the echoes of Tamiris's reign were not confined to a single generation or a narrow set of influences. They resonated through every facet of Massagetei life and beyond, shaping their political landscape, their social structures, their spiritual beliefs, their artistic expressions, and their very understanding of what it meant to be Massagetei. She was the sun around which their collective memory orbited, her light illuminating their past and guiding their path into an uncertain future, a constant reminder of their capacity for fierce resilience and their unyielding commitment to freedom on the boundless, wind-swept heartland of Asia. Her story was, in essence, the enduring soul of her people. The long-term memory of Tamiris's strategic acumen would also inform Massagetei military thinking for centuries. Her decision to lure Cyrus deep into her territory, stretching his supply lines and fighting on familiar ground, became a classic example of successful asymmetric warfare. Future Massagetei war leaders, when faced with larger, more conventionally powerful foes, would instinctively look to these principles. They understood that direct confrontation against a numerically superior, heavily armored enemy was often foolish. Instead, the emphasis remained on mobility, surprise, knowledge of the terrain, and the psychological erosion of the enemy's will to fight, all lessons exemplified by Tamiris's campaign against the Persians. This ingrained strategic preference contributed significantly to the long-term survival and independence of steppe peoples in the face of repeated incursions by sedentary empires. Moreover, the deep personal motivation behind Tamiris's actions, the avenging of her son, added a layer of emotional intensity to the Massagetei warrior ethos that went beyond simple patriotism or defense of territory. It imbued their fighting spirit with a sense of profound, almost sacred duty when kinship and honor were violated. This made them particularly formidable opponents, as an enemy was not just facing an army, but a people fueled by a collective memory of righteous fury. This Tamiris spirit could be reignited by any perceived egregious wrong, transforming a pragmatic defense into a crusade of vengeance. The diplomatic interactions of the Massagetei would also reflect a certain pragmatism born from her experience. While Cyrus's initial offer of marriage was a clear ploy for domination, Tamiris did not immediately resort to war. She attempted a diplomatic refusal first. This precedent would suggest that Massagetei leaders were not inherently warmongering, but would explore peaceful solutions until a red line was crossed. However, once that line, defined by treachery or an undeniable threat to their sovereignty or kinship, was violated, as it was with Spargapais's death, then the response, like Tamiris's, would be total and uncompromising. This created a diplomatic posture that was both cautious and capable of fearsome resolve. Consider the impact on the Massagetei's system of alliances. Tamiris had led a confederation of clans. Her success would have underscored the vital importance of intertribal unity in the face of a common, powerful enemy. The memory of their collective triumph under her banner would serve as a constant reminder that their strength lay in solidarity. When future threats arose, leaders seeking to unite disparate steppe groups could invoke Tamiris's example, arguing that only by setting aside internal differences, as their ancestors had done for her, could they hope to prevail. Her legend became a foundational argument for pan-steppe cooperation against external aggressors. The storytelling tradition itself, as the primary guardian of her legacy, would have held an esteemed place in Massagetei society. Bards were not mere entertainers. They were historians, educators, moral guides, and spiritual conduits. Their ability to vividly recount the Tamiris epic, to evoke its emotions and impart its lessons, was a vital skill. This respect for the power of the spoken word and the keepers of memory would have been a defining characteristic of their culture, ensuring the continuity of their identity across generations, even in the absence of written records. The words of the bards kept Tamiris and her world alive. Finally, the ultimate fate of Tamiris, her fading from the historical record after her great act, her return to the anonymity of the Steppe in death, also held a powerful lesson. It spoke to a certain humility, a recognition that even the greatest leaders were ultimately part of the larger cycle of nature and the collective destiny of their people. She did not seek to build stone monuments to her own glory. Her monument was the continued freedom of Massagetai. This resonated with the nomadic ethos, where permanence was found not in static structures, but in the enduring lineage of the tribe and its unbroken connection to the land. Her legend was her truest, most lasting monument, carried in the hearts of her people, as vast and timeless as the steppes themselves. Thus, Queen Tamiris remained not just a figure from the past, but a perpetual wellspring of strength, wisdom, and unyielding spirit for all who called themselves the people of the horse, the children of the endless plains. The echoes of Tamiris's fierce justice would also resonate in how the Massagetai dealt with internal betrayals or severe crimes within their own society. While daily disputes might be settled by councils of elders or through established customs, acts of profound treachery, such as aiding an enemy or causing the death of a kinsman through deceit, would likely elicit a response that mirrored, in its severity and symbolic weight, Tamiris's judgment on Cyrus. Her actions provided a precedent for uncompromising retribution when core societal bonds were violated, reinforcing the idea that some offences were so grave they demanded an absolute and memorable punishment to maintain the integrity of the tribe. The landscape itself, beyond specific named locations, would become a canvas for her story. A particularly harsh stretch of desert Cyrus's army had to cross might be forever known as Cyrus's Thirst, before he even reached the wineskin. A field where a preliminary skirmish occurred might be the Field of Omens. These names, woven into the daily life and travels of the Massagetai, served as constant, subtle reminders of their history and the queen who defined it. It was a living history, not confined to books, but etched into the very earth they trod. Furthermore, the deep emotional core of Tamiris's story, a mother's love and loss fueling an epic struggle, ensured its timeless relatability. While the grand scale of battles and empires might be abstract, the pain of losing a child was a universal human experience. This emotional anchor made Tamiris more than just a distant warrior queen. It made her a profoundly human figure, whose motivations, however extreme their expression, could be understood at a fundamental level. This human element was key to the legend's enduring power and its ability to connect with successive generations. Even the Massagetai's relationship with their horses, already central to their nomadic lifestyle, could have been subtly enhanced by the legend. Tamiris, the supreme equestrian warrior, and her black war stallion became iconic. The bond between rider and horse, crucial for survival and warfare on the steppes, was exemplified in its most heroic form by their queen. This would further elevate the status of skilled horsemanship and the reverence for these animals, which were not just beasts of burden but partners in life, war, and legend. The absence of a grand, dynastic succession following Tamiris in the same mould, where her direct descendants automatically ruled for centuries, also spoke to the Massagetai way. Leadership, while respecting lineage, was ultimately earned through merit and the consensus of the clans, as Tamiris herself had demonstrated. Her own son, Spargapices, was her heir apparent, but his claim was also based on his proven abilities as a commander. Her legacy was not one of establishing a rigid dynasty, but of embodying the ideal qualities of leadership that others must then strive to achieve. This fostered a more fluid and potentially more resilient political system, capable of producing strong leaders from various clans when needed. In the grand sweep of history, where empires rose and fell like an inexorable tide, the story of Tamiris stood as a defiant island, a testament to the fact that the human spirit, when driven by love, grief, and an unyielding will for freedom, could indeed move mountains, or in her case, shatter empires. In the grand sweep of history, where empires rose and fell like an inexorable tide, the story of Tamiris stood as a defiant island, a testament to the fact that the human spirit, when driven by love, grief, and an unyielding will for freedom, could indeed move her. Her legend was a fierce assertion of indigenous strength against imperial overreach. A narrative that would find echoes in the resistance movements of countless other peoples throughout history, even those who had never heard her name. The archetype she embodied was universal. And so Tomiris, Queen of the Massagetes, Slayer of Cyrus, Avenger of Spargapices, continued to ride through the imagination of her people and, eventually, the world. Her story, born in the dust and blood of the ancient steppes, became a timeless epic, a powerful reminder that history is not only written by the great kings and conquerors in their stone palaces, but also by the fierce hearts of those who refuse to be erased, their legends carried on the wind, as enduring and untamed as the wild lands they called home. Her story, born in the dust and blood of the ancient steppes, became a timeless epic, a powerful reminder that history is not only written by the great kings and conquerors in their stone palaces, but also by the fierce hearts of those who refuse to lose tea. The enduring lesson of Tomiris, woven into the fabric of Massagete life, was perhaps most profoundly about the nature of true wealth and true power. Cyrus, with his boundless ambition, sought to accumulate land, gold, and subjugated peoples. His power was measured in the scale of his dominion. Tomiris, in contrast, derived her power from the fierce loyalty of her people, her intimate knowledge of her ancestral lands, and an unshakable commitment to her tribe's freedom and honor. Her wealth was not in material possessions that could be plundered, but in the intangible strength of her community and the depth of their shared identity. Her story served as a constant reminder to the Massagete that external markers of imperial grandeur, sprawling cities, vast treasuries, intricate bureaucracies, were not the ultimate measures of a people's worth or strength. Their nomadic lifestyle, often viewed as primitive by sedentary empires, was in fact a source of resilience, adaptability, and a profound connection to the natural world that settled peoples often lost. Tomiris's victory was a validation of their way of life, a demonstration that their skills, their values, and their understanding of the steppes gave them a unique power that even the most sophisticated empires could underestimate at their peril. This understanding would have influenced their choices in trade and cultural exchange. While they engaged with other civilizations, they would have done so with a discerning eye, adopting what was useful or beautiful without necessarily succumbing to the allure of imperial lifestyles that would compromise their freedom or their core values. While they engaged with other civilizations, they would have done so with a discerning eye, adopting what was useful or beautiful without necessarily succumbing to the allure of imperial lifestyles that would compromise their demand. The memory of Cyrus's downfall, driven by his insatiable desire for more, served as a cautionary tale against the corrupting influence of excessive materialism or the pursuit of power for its own sake. The legend of Tomiris thus became a cultural compass, helping the Massagete navigate the complex and often dangerous world of inter-tribal and inter-imperial relations. It provided them with a set of guiding principles: vigilance against external threats, the importance of unity, the sanctity of kinship and honor, the value of their unique way of life, and the understanding that true strength comes from within. As the centuries passed, and the name Massagete eventually blended into the larger tapestry of Central Asian peoples, the spirit of Tomiris, the archetypal warrior queen who defended her people with ferocity and wisdom, would continue to surface in the region's folklore and heroic traditions. Her specific historical identity might become veiled in myth, but the essential truth of her stand against tyranny, her maternal rage, and her ultimate triumph would remain, a powerful and enduring testament to the indomitable will of a free people. Her legacy was not merely a story of the past. It was a perennial source of inspiration, a whisper on the steppe wind, reminding all who would listen that even the smallest flame of defiance, if fueled by justice and love, could set an empire ablaze.